Welcome to an introduction to Limit HoldEm in 10 minutes or less, brought to you by Rec.Poker. So what is Limit HoldEm? Well, it's very similar to No Limit HoldEm. You get 2 hold cards, 5 board cards, and there are 4 betting rounds, just like No Limit HoldEm. It's played with blinds. There's a small blind and a big blind. Also, there's a small bet. The small bet is equal to the same size as the big blind and is used on the pre-flop and flop betting rounds. The big bet, which is double the small bet, is used on the turn and river betting rounds. And raises in any betting round are usually capped at 4 or 5 bets depending upon the site or the room. And the best hand wins, using the usual hand rankings: high card, pair, 2 pair, etc. And a royal flush is the best possible hand. So let's move on to an example hand. In this example, Doyle is in the small blind with 100 chips, Maria is the big blind with 200 chips, and Steve is under the gun with pocket aces. Steve, of course, would like to raise with those pocket aces, and the only raise size he can do is equal to the small bet, or 200 additional chips. So he raises an additional 200 for 400 total. Jim opts to fold. Chris calls the 400 chips. Taylor folds. Rob also calls the 400 chips. Phil folds. Vanessa folds. And then John calls the 400 chips. Doyle opts to surrender his small blind, and Maria decides to 3-bet to 600 chips. Steve, of course, likes that and decides to 4-bet to 800 chips. Now Chris decides to fold. Rob also folds. John, on the other hand, calls. And now it's back on Maria. Maria decides to 5-bet and cap the betting round at 1,000 chips. Steve then makes a call since he can no longer raise, and John calls as well. And now we move on to the flop with 3,900 chips in the pot. The flop brings a 7 deuce, or a jack 7 deuce, and Maria starts the betting. She decides to bet to 200 chips. Steve raises to 400 chips. John calls the 400 chips. Maria then 3-bets to 600. Steve 4-bets to 800. And now John decides to fold. That's enough for him. Maria now just opts to call and pull the chips into the pot and see the turn. The turn comes the king of diamonds. Maria's first to act. She checks. Steve bets 400 chips. Notice it's now double the betting amount that it was on the flop and pre-flop. Maria raises to 800 chips, and Steve opts to just call. Now we move on to the river, and the river brings a deuce of diamonds. Maria leads out for 400 chips. Steve calls, and the dealer pulls all of the chips into the pot. Now we have a showdown. Maria shows pocket kings, making kings full. Steve then mucks his hand, and Maria wins the pot. Here are a couple of additional tips beyond the rules. Remember that bets add up, especially the big bets on the turn and the river. Although they're smaller than they are in No Limit HoldEm, you still do need to conserve your chips. Also, you have reduced implied odds. That means that you aren't going to win as much if you hit speculative hands because you can't bet as large and people won't be calling as large of bets. So you need to play speculative hands a little bit more carefully. Also, you probably should slow play less Because the bet sizes don't go up geometrically the way they do in no limit hold'em, you need to make sure that you bet the early streets because you won't be able to make up for it later. Also, you should check raise more. That's another way to get more chips into the pot. And if you make it all the way to the river, opt to call more often than you would in no limit hold'em, mainly because you're getting such a good price, generally speaking, by the time you made it to the river. If that's not the case, then of course look at your pot odds and evaluate accordingly, but often you will be getting a great price. So join us in our Rec.Poker home games. We play No Limit Hold'em the first Wednesday of every month at 8 p.m. and mixed games the second Wednesday of every month at 8 p.m. Check out all of the information at rec.poker/homegame. See you on the felt.